Hear me, souls adrift in the digital void, and steel your hearts for a truth that the world was never meant to hold. What I am about to recount is not found in any canonized Bible, nor is it etched into the cold marble of the Vatican's secret vaults. This is a forbidden gospel, a chronicle passed down through the blood-stained whispers of the 2000th generation, the descendants of those who saw the Messiah's footprints in places where even the sun refused to shine. You believe he only walked the peaceful, sapphire shores of Galilee, healing the sick with a gentle touch? You are mistaken. In a fracture of reality, where the sins of the New World grew too heavy for the earth to bear, the Creator sent his only Son to the rugged, cursed lands of the American West. He was sent to walk through the black sludge of human cruelty, to face the entities birthed from the curdled blood of the innocent. This is the story of Jesus' journey through the American death villages, places where agony, isolation, and the putrefaction of the human heart have manifested into terrifying physical gods of rot. The journey began as the Messiah walked the overgrown, jagged trail leading into the Black Ridge settlement high in the Appalachian Heights. The sun hung in the sky like a bruised, internal organ, casting long, needle-like shadows that seemed to move with a predatory life of their own. This was the site of the 1930s Ridge Reaper Massacre, a massacre not of strangers, but of brothers. A lone man named Elias, driven to a fever pitch of madness by the cold, calculated ostracization of his neighbors, had finally snapped. In a single night of thunderous lead and flashing steel, he extinguished 30 lives, turning the quiet mountain air into a symphony of gurgling screams. The Creator laments the internal rot here, for the true sin of Black Ridge was not just the murder, it was the decades of silent, smiling cruelty that had turned Elias's heart into a hornet's nest of hate. As Jesus stepped past the rusted, hanging gate, the very atmosphere groaned. He saw the spirits of the victims, men, women, and children, still crawling through the eternal mud of that night, their spectral hands clutching chest wounds that would never close, their mouths filled with the soil of their own graves. Elias was no mere monster, he was a vessel, a hollow man filled with the community's accumulated bile. He was the mirror the village had built, and when they looked into him, they saw their own destruction. Jesus knelt in the dirt where the blood had soaked so deep that the grass had turned to permanent, sickly, metallic black. He touched the earth, and a scream erupted from the tectonic plates, not a scream of pain, but a roar of loneliness so profound it warped the light of the moon. He saw Elias's spirit bound by chains forged from every no, every turned back, and every mocking laugh the village had ever offered him. The Creator self-reproaches for those who used society as a guillotine to drive a man into the abyss. Jesus spoke to the darkness, his voice a low vibration that made the mountains tremble. I came not to judge the man who pulled the trigger, but to bear the frost of the hearts that refused to love him while he still breathed. His light cracked the heavy, pressurized atmosphere, but the ghosts of Black Ridge clung to their hate like a shroud, their eyes fixed on the man who had finally brought the terrifying truth into their silent Appalachian hell. Leaving the blood-soaked soil of the ridge, the Messiah's path descended into the suffocating, gray mist of Ironwood Creek. This was a town sacrificed to the altar of progress, buried beneath the rising waters of a massive hydroelectric dam in the 1970s. Here, the horror was not the spray of blood, but an all-encompassing, crushing emptiness. The houses stood beneath the surface like bleached skeletons in a watery tomb, their windows staring up at the world like the eyes of the drowned, waiting for a breath of life that would never return. Jesus stood upon the concrete lip of the dam and heard the mocking, high-pitched laughter of urban explorers, young men with cameras and hollow souls who treated the site of 162 ruined lives as a playground for content. The Creator vo'oa in divine sorrow as he watched them trample over the rotted remains of a family chapel, their heavy boots crushing the sacred pews into splinters without a single thought of prayer. Jesus raised his hand, and a violent, supernatural gale tore through the valley. The roar of the falling waters suddenly transformed into the rhythmic, agonizing chanting of the workers buried deep beneath the concrete, men whose names had been erased, whose lives were considered less valuable than the kilowatt hours they died to produce. He confronted the spirit of a man who had committed arson and suicide in the ruins in 2013. A man who had lost everything and chose to go out in a blaze of defiance. The man's soul was still smoldering in a spiritual fire that cast no light. Only long, distorted shadows that licked at the Messiah's feet. Jesus walked directly into the white-hot center of that despair, his flesh untouched, but his heart weeping for the arsonist's terminal isolation. He turned to the trespassers hiding in the dark, their cameras shaking in their hands. You seek demons in your games and ghost hunting apps. Yet the true demon is the apathy you carry in your pockets like loose change. You film the ruins of fathers, but you are deaf to the ghosts of the sons who have nowhere left to go. He dissipated the illusions of the missing families, revealing the raw, industrial truth. There was no magic here, only the slow, agonizing rot of a people discarded by a country that had moved on to the next bright, electric thing. From the drowned valley, the Messiah traveled to the rain-slicked, moss-choked woods of the Pacific Northwest to seek Silver Creek. This was a place that did not exist on any map, yet it was more real than the stone of the mountains, for it was built entirely from the dark, collective imagination of humanity. In 1953, a family of 7 had been slaughtered there, a terrible, visceral tragedy, but from that single seed of violence, the world had woven a sprawling, hydra-headed monster of urban legend. Jesus stood before a rusted, bullet-riddled billboard that dripped with a fluid that looked like oil and smelled like ancient, clotted blood. He saw houses with walls covered in bloody handprints, not real blood, but the spiritual residue of millions of malicious rumors whispered over campfires, radio waves, and digital forums. The Creator laments that a man's word is sharper than any Roman spear, capable of creating a hell where none existed. The demons here were the faceless watchers, entities born from the harmful curiosity of a public that hungered for tragedy to spice up their mundane lives. Jesus saw these beings, their features blurred and distorted like low-resolution images, feeding on the fear of those who dared to enter. They were the children of the egregore, thought forms that had gained a terrifying autonomy. Jesus knelt and began to write in the blood-stained dust of the road, each letter vibrating through the phantom houses like a divine earthquake. He was not just fighting spirits, he was battling the cumulative weight of human lies. He used the genuine, forgotten pain of the original 1953 victims, the actual people, not the legends, to shatter the illusions. He embraced the spirit of the youngest child from that massacre, a girl whose memory had been twisted into a vengeful, long-haired ghost by the internet. He shielded her from the prying eyes of the future, whispering, "You are not a story to be told in the dark to frighten children. You are a soul that was loved, and you are finally seen." As he spoke, the fabricated houses of Silver Creek began to dissolve into ash, leaving only the quiet, honest trees. The path then brought him to Green Hollow, a town where the horror was hidden behind pristine white picket fences and the terrifying social art of the shunning. In the early 1950s, the town elders had organized a massive voter fraud scheme, stealing the voices of the dead and the marginalized to maintain their iron grip on power. A young girl named Sarah had dared to expose the corruption in her school newspaper. And in response, the town did not kill her body, they killed her existence. They practiced murahachibu on an American scale. They stopped speaking to her family, they cut off their water, they looked through them as if they were glass. They made them ghosts while their hearts were still beating. The Creator laments the sanctimonious cruelty of a crowd that prays for mercy on Sunday and practices execution by silence on Monday. Jesus stood in the town square, his shadow stretching across the courthouse like a divine eclipse that refused to pass. He was at his most terrifying here, for he did not come as a gentle shepherd, but as the consuming fire of truth. He sings a song of judgment, a frequency so pure it made the fraudulent ballots hidden in the basement vaults burst into a blue, unquenchable flame. He looked into the eyes of the elders, their faces masked in the plastic piety of the suburbs, and spoke, "You worship your traditions, but your hearts are dens for vipers. You have buried the living to protect the lies of the dead because the lies are more profitable. I would rather sit in the dirt with the shunned than dine at the tables of you righteous men who trade the soul of a child for the power of a vote." He turned their silence into an agonizing, high-pitched ringing in their ears, a permanent, celestial tinnitus that ensured they would never again know a moment of peace. He declared that every greeting they withheld from the innocent would now be a millstone around their necks in the halls of eternity. Finally, the Messiah reached the desolate, wind-stripped peaks of Blackwood Ridge and the crumbling remains of Coldwater, places where even memory was rotting into the acidic soil. In the ruins of Blackwood, Jesus heard the sound of a phantom flute and the rhythmic, hollow thumping of drums emanating from the shell of a collapsed church. This was not the music of the divine, but the resonance of ancestral fear, a sound that had driven explorers to the brink of insanity. He walked into the absolute, velvet darkness where hikers had felt the pressure of cold, dead hands on their throats. He faced the entity lurking there, a shadow fed by the unknown and the forgotten. Jesus did not banish it with a flash of light, he faced it with the crushing weight of his pure presence. He spoke to the void. This place is not cursed by ancient demons, but by the abandonment of those who once called it home. You fear the ghost, but the ghost is only the grief of a town that died without a single person to say, Amen, over its grave. He lit a single candle in the center of the ruins, and its flame burned with a steady, white-hot intensity that did not flicker even as the mountain winds howled like banshees. In Coldwater, he stood on the treacherous, crumbling cliffs where the broken-hearted came seeking a permanent escape from a world that had failed them. He looked into the thick, gray mist that whispered promises of a peace that was only a lie. Jesus reached out, his hand moving faster than the pull of gravity, catching the soul of a young man at the very moment his feet left the ledge. He showed the man that death in these cursed ruins was not an escape, but an eternal imprisonment in a place where no human voice would ever reach him again. He commanded, Go back to the light of the living, do not seek salvation in these cathedrals of stone and sorrow. As Jesus stepped out of the hollows, his robes were stained with the gray ash of abandoned homes and the dark, metallic residue of forgotten tragedies. He turned back to look at the death towns of the American wilderness one last time. He did not erase them from the map, he left them as silent scars. Warnings to a world that forgets its own cruelty far too easily. He declared to the wind, as long as man uses isolation to punish his brother, as long as he uses rumors to kill the truth, then Black Ridge and Silver Creek will exist, not in the woods, but in the dark, unmapped corridors of your own souls. Now, I ask you, do you dare to walk those hollows? Or will you choose to love while men are still living, so that the Creator does not have to lament again? Remember, when you hear a flute in the deep woods or see a rusted gate dripping red, it isn't the devil calling, it is the echo of the sins humanity tried to bury, waiting for the light to find them.